review of Grant Morrison's Animal Man. We're going to talk real quick, staying on the Grant Morrison topic, but Yuhoo here had just read for the first time Grant Morrison's Batman and Son. No, that's just one arc. Grant Morrison's Batman run. So, what did you think of that, real quick?
No, it's Batman and Son, and I think it's Batman R.I.P., which is what I read. So that's like the first omnibus you could see right there. Man, it's a crazy book. I did not expect this thing to be what it was. This is one of those runs that I feel like everyone has their own preconceived notion of before they even get into it because you hear about Damian Wayne being introduced. You hear about James Gunn wanting to adapt this for his like cinematic universe. You hear about the Black Glove. You hear about like Morrison just being crazy. So I had so much expectation for this run that I feel like it was kind of hard to be able to match that hype, if you get what I mean. But somehow like Morrison did it, dude. Like I feel like the Batman and Son stuff where Batman interacts with Damien for the first time. I know Damian Wayne as a character. I know what he acts like. Despite all of that, it was still really fun and interesting to see those first interactions. I loved it. I really loved the Batman R.I.P. arc though with Zur-En-Arrh. It was this weird psychedelic journey into the psyche of Batman where he kind of forces himself to become something else. I feel like within doing that, Morrison's trying to make a statement not only about like, yo, Batman is this twisted, messed up character. He's also trying to be like, Batman is a godlike character, And there's a lot of juxtaposition there, so it doesn't make sense. But Morrison does it in a way that not a lot of authors could pull off. Because if you try to create this thesis statement of Batman is insane. Batman is a messed up individual that is mere flesh and blood, but he's also a god in the continuity of DC and has done everything and everything. That's just going to come across as so difficult to, get across to the reader. But Morrison does it, and I don't know how, but they did it. I completely adored this run. I know you said Batman and Son is one of your favorite arcs as well, so I'm curious what you think about it.
Yeah, I loved it from the first time I read it. Seeing Damian, he was such an excellent character to throw into DC. A son of Batman who's raised as an assassin. Of course, he wants to take the mantle as Robin. And what I loved about it is he was so down to like get taken under his dad's wing instead of wanting to just fight back and be a little like asshole the whole time. Like he actually really wanted to like be by his dad's side. Eventually, he stopped killing for his dad and stuff. But I liked the drama getting to that to him to stop killing because he was a freaking killer at first. R.I.P. was one of my favorites. I loved it's like one of the best comics that shows that Batman has planned ahead the whole time. The way that ended, and I forgot the details because it's been a while, but I just remember like yes, he pulled it off, and it was very satisfying as a Batman fan when you hear so much about his planning and his resourcefulness and his genius, but it's not always portrayed in the comics as well as I would like it to. But R.I.P. did that. What other arcs were in that? So does he have one omnibus or does he have two?
They have three omnis, so I think after this arc is like Final Crisis, and then it's like it goes into the Batman and Robin one, which is like Dick and Damian, and I don't know what comes after that actually. And then I know the third omnibus has Batman incorporated in it, but I haven't read more than the first one, so I'm not entirely sure.
Interesting. Did it do the resurrection of Ra's al Ghul in this omnibus?
Yes, I think that's included in like the. Actually, no, yeah, you're right. That's like a totally separate arc. Yeah.
Okay. I like that one too. I don't know if I've read all of it, so because I don't have it in omnibus form, I
It's
just have a
weird.
few
It's
trades.
it's not collected fully in this one either, because I guess Paul Dini wrote half of it, and then Grant Morrison wrote the first issue. Paul Dini wrote like the middle two issues, and then Grant Morrison wrote the final issue. So you read like the first one by Morrison, and then they like basically summarize it, and then like what Dini wrote, and then Morrison closes it out.
Okay. Have you read the Paul Dini stuff?
I'm gonna get around to it eventually. I have a lot of Batman I need to read, but that's definitely next up on the list, I think.
That's the struggle of a comic book collector. There's always a long list of stuff to buy and read.
It's so overwhelming, but
It
one
is
day.
very.
That's my goal. One day. Is
The
that? Do I
Paul.
see it right there next to your Infinite
That
Crisis?
is. Yeah, it's the
Nice.
only Batman omnibus I have.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is it
because I
good?
don't even. It's really good. It's so like classic Batman, yet with modern art. Um, Usually it's like one or two issue arcs. There's just a couple arcs that are more than a couple issues, like the Heart of Hush, a deep dive into the villain of Hush, which is really cool. One of my favorite Joker issues ever, called the Sleigh Ride, I think, and he's got Tim Drake in his car driving around, like running people over, talking shit, just terrorizing Jason, and Jason can't do anything. Great Joker issue, but there's a lot of good stuff, and I like that it's not. You could just read a couple issues and put it down because it's not this arc that you're like, oh, I got to read what's next. I got to read what's next. There's just a ton of small little stories. It feels like because he did the Batman animated show too, and you totally get that feel, except it doesn't feel like a cartoon. It's still really it's pretty dark, but you get that detective Batman a lot. So it's really solid. Not talked about enough. I think it could probably be a top 5 like Batman comics for me. It's really good.
Is there like a reason why that's one of the only Batman omnibus you have? Do you just like collecting in other ways, or was that the one
I,
run you were like, I need this in the omnibus
I
edition?
basically because you can't collect it in any other way. There's
Oh,
not I don't not that I know of as far as trades unless you get single issues. But I heard about it and I wanted all of it, and it's so separate that I just wanted it all in a complete package. So one purchase, and then that was I think my second omnibus ever after Annihilation Conquest,
oh,
and
dang, that's a good one to have too.
really good one. Omnibus is now my favorite thing to collect, but it's expensive, so it's kind of hard to just toss $80 down, and get an omnibus.
Yeah, no, I feel that.
Boom. All right, so that'll be our cold open, and then that's when we'll after edit the musical hit. But there is an echo. You can hear me
Uh,
through your headphones, right?
I can
Just not
turn
through
on
your
this button
computer.
that says echo cancellation. I guess yeah, I hear myself. I hear myself through you, if that makes sense. But it's not that bad
Yeah.
for me.
Usually, if it's coming through our headphones, I have no idea where the echo would be coming from.
I could try moving my mic back maybe, because I have
Try that.
open here headphones. So let me.
Shabba-dubba-dubba-dee. I can still hear it.
Hello.
It's so weird.
Hmm.
Interesting. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop the recording real quick because it won't actually end the whole session because I can't turn off echo cancellation until the recording stops. Echoes are gone. All right, I'll get into the intro. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Why So Sidious, a nerd podcast where we talk Marvel, Star Wars, DC, and more. Comics, movies, all of it. Today we've got a returning guest, Yuhoo from Yuhoo Comic Review. He was on the pod last year for an episode titled Comic Talk, where we ranked our favorite Marvel and DC comics, favorite heroes, and a bunch of other categories. Very happy to have this dude on. He drops fantastic comic content on his page, Instagram, TikTok. Anything else?
Also on YouTube.
And YouTube at Yuhoo underscore comic underscore review. He's a wizard. Excellent comic reviews, really intelligent talk on comics, and sometimes their connections to the real world, some propaganda, really interesting stuff like that. So thanks for coming on, dude. Pleasure to have you.
No, yeah, it's great to be back. I really enjoyed talking to you last year, especially about Daredevil. That was so fun.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, we were also on Yuhu's show for a Daredevil covering Brian Michael Bendis' show.
Oh, wait, I thought I feel like I talked about it on your show too. I remember vividly. I'm like, yo, but
Yeah, you
you're right
hosted
about
that
that.
one.
Okay, my
That
bad.
was
I
some
got it
good
mixed
shit.
up. But no, I remember now.
So today our topic is Grant Morrison's Animal Man, a classic. I was blown away reading this. Didn't expect such like a game-changing comic. Kind of an interstellar surprise kind of ending in a way. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to our Instagram, X, TikTok, and YouTube. we want to hit our first 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, where we now do all of our episodes live. We're at 13,000 on TikTok, and we just want to reach our first 1,000 on YouTube. So we really appreciate the support. Some of our recent episodes include a look back at Rings of Power Season 1 and what to expect for Season 2, and it's titled the Ultimate Rings of Power episode. We also finally jumped back into our road to Secret Wars, where we're covering chronologically all the comics through the Hickman Avengers and New Avengers stuff leading up to Secret Wars, and our most recent one was the New Avengers Volume 3. And of course, we got our Week in Geeks, where we cover all the recent nerd fandom news. Also, in the podcast descriptions, there's a support link to. There's a support the show link. Great way to keep us cooking, improving, putting out more content. So if you're feeling generous, give it a shot. All right, let's get into it. Yuhoo, again, thanks so much for coming on, and let's hear what you think of your overall comic, your overall thoughts on this comic.
Yeah, no, I think I told you to read this book. I think you read it off my recommendation because I told you
Yep.
this is like my favorite comic book of all time. And I was really nervous because I was like, it's one of the first comics I read. One of like maybe like the fourth or fifth omnibus I read. And so after reading this book, I read a lot of other comics. I've read so many stories, different authors, different Morrison stories. So coming back to this book, I was like, I've gassed this up a lot. So it's gonna be really embarrassing if I walk into this and then he's like, I mean, that was good, but like best comic of all time. I don't know about that. Luckily, I reread this book and I still felt as confident in it as I did the first time I read it. It's just it's action packed. It's really intriguing and philosophical. And most importantly, I think the ending of this book, like you said, is one of the most interesting and mind-bending finales to a comic I've ever experienced. The way Morrison uses meta commentary and interpersonal trauma to interject a lot of soul and heart into this book, I just haven't experienced anything like that. And I've read a lot of comics since, and I still haven't, experienced a moment like that in comic books.
100%. It's like when you hear about Grant Morrison's wild storytelling. This is a perfect example of that because that ending was not only just a surprise ending, but it was something that completely broke all expectations, like past the point of surprise. It was like it changed the game. And we'll get into that ending. But so this story is about a man whose ambitions have been a little larger than his potential. It's kind of the underdog, but a man whose motivations seem to put him on a path where, eventually is picked up to the potential that he has to offer. To meet those ambitions, a lot of stuff dealing with animal cruelty, and it's you're right. Like I didn't expect to like this comic as much as I did.
Right.
Um,
It
but
starts out so. Oh, sorry, you could keep going too, but
well,
it's
I was hooked from the beginning too, though. It didn't start out slow for me or anything. If that's where you were going, I couldn't put it down. I don't know what it was, but it was such an interesting dive into the character of Buddy, and I really liked Buddy. I really appreciated the underdog story there. His wife was pretty frustrated at his dreams. She says dreams don't pay the bills, and he's trying to join the JLI, Justice League International. Really wants to be a superhero full time again. I don't know what he was doing before this book. This is the only Animal Man comic I've read. Uh, but I couldn't put it down because his motivations were in the right place, and it's like he was like a vulnerable character yet so relatable. He was just a family man with these super cool powers, and once we dove into those powers, it was a lot of fun because they were pretty special. Um, so, what were you about to say? Because I was going to ask you, did it hook you early on, and were you invested from the beginning?
I was kind of curious about your opinion on that too, because I feel like reading the first issue of this book, it kind of does come across as like this is like an 80s, late 80s comic book about this weird superhero. His power is that he can inherit the abilities of any animal, and it's like this is cool, but there's nothing distinct within the first issue that made it really stick out to me. Um, and then in the second, I think it's the second issue, his arm gets like ripped off, right? And the issue ends with him. I think he's lying in a trash heap, he's missing his limb, and you're like, did that just happen? I remember the first time I read the comic, I just didn't see it coming. And watching him like at this like low point, basically dying, that was the moment where I'm like, whoa, I did not expect that on the second issue. This is nuts. And then after that, it just keeps picking up and throwing all of these different curveballs at you. And I was curious, like for you personally, was there any specific moment or element that stuck out to you immediately, and you're like, okay, I'm invested?
The same exact moment, especially because he uses the power of worms to grow a new arm back. I was like, no way. This is how deep his powers go. Like he'll trigger insects and their rehabilitation. It's crazy. So at that point, I was like, okay, not only am I invested in the character, but I'm really loving the exploration of these powers. And that didn't disappoint as we moved through. Like when he uses like bacteria or flies like throughout this book, and it was just so interesting. So yeah, I was really happy with it. The animal cruelty thing, you know, super sad that it exists in life. I freaking hate it so much. So that was introduced pretty early on, and I was looking forward to the satisfaction of animals being saved and the abusers being beat up, you know, hurt themselves. Those things, though, the satisfaction of the abusers getting their ass whooped happened a little less than I wanted, but there was still a few pieces that it was very satisfying. Because Morrison's not really about that surface level satisfaction. He's telling deep, layered stories. It's not just action and revenge, you know, it's not really like that. And the book is better off for it, because if it was all just a bunch of, all right, this animal's getting abused, Buddy goes and whoops his ass, you know, that would be very just dry. It would end up being pretty dry. Were you expecting more of that kind of storytelling when they started introducing the animal abuse and the vengeance he wanted to take on them early on?
It's interesting because I never really thought about it from that perspective, especially on my first read. I kind of viewed it almost as a novelty. And it's really interesting because there's a lot of different elements you can take from Animal Man. Animal abuse and commenting on the horrific things that happen in the, especially in like large agricultural industries, is something that is there to unpack and dissect in this book. But you also have these themes of meta humor and purpose and kind of just questioning the medium of comics itself. That the theme of like animal cruelty being something that was deserving of analysis wasn't really on the front of my mind when I first read it, and even on the reread. It wasn't until I was actually, prior to reading the book, there's like a foreword in the beginning. I don't know if you have the omnibus, but Grant Morrison talks about how like they became a vegetarian while writing Animal Man, and like this book and like making the character of Buddy Baker force them to learn more about the agricultural industry and more about how like horrific the things are, and you know, meat packing and treatment of animals outside of even just mass slaughter, but like treatment in zoos and stuff like that. And so obviously this is a topic that is very, very important to Grant Morrison. And it's there, like you said, it's very noticeable. But it's just funny because like it's not the thing I was thinking about immediately when reading this comic.
For sure. It's one of the things that hooked me early on. I was like, ooh, finally a comic that's, you know, I want to see some animal abusers get their shit wrecked. It's like the satisfaction of seeing the Punisher kill human traffickers. It's just like those are the people you want. They deserve to feel pain. They kind of deserve to die. So that hooked me early on. And there was only a few instances of that, but there's like it's Morrison. It's not about that surface level satisfaction. What did you think of the Beast Bawana Beast arc?
Yeah, that was the first arc, I believe, right?
Yeah.
That arc is so weird to me because it starts out just so bonkers. I think he comes to this animal facility and they're testing on like chimpanzees, I believe, and they fuse them into this one mega disgusting beast. And then he has to track down this guy who I believe he's from Africa, and find out like why he's running away from this facility, and it has to do with this mutant virus that they accidentally unleashed onto this human. And it's this whole, essentially the thesis of the story is talking about humankind trying to interfere with nature and inevitably creating a monstrosity that has the ability to cause more harm to humankind, right? A story as old as time. I thought it was really entertaining, and I particularly love the end of it, where, and I feel like you might have resonated with that too, where he does have that moment where he can say, "Ah, got you, animal abuser," where he kind of forces him to reckon with his actions, I believe, by kind of fusing him, that guy, with the monstrosity he created. That was a very poetic moment. Really funny.
Yeah, I actually used the word poetic in my notes too, because he fuses the man that was authorizing all this testing and abuse on this monkey, and that man was fused with the monkey, so he was now undergoing that treatment, that torture, the testing. So that was a really satisfying moment. I like Buddy's quote when he's talking about like him realizing what's going on with animal abuse. He says, "We were given a paradise and we turned it into an abattoir, which is a slaughterhouse. Everywhere we go, we leave things bleeding and screaming. We're murdering the world. We have to be stopped. Mankind has to be stopped before there's nothing left except humans." That resonated with me. It's like, I don't know if like if you when you were younger, if you ever just saw one of those videos about cows or pigs or anything in a mass production farm, and
Yeah.
it was like the most traumatizing thing for me ever. I didn't go vegetarian, but it did lead me to, and I've wanted to do this forever, having my own cows or pigs because they will have a happy life at least, and my dollar won't go into those mass produced farms, that cows and everything, dude, they're just living in terrible conditions. Even when they get pregnant, their babies get taken away, and the cows are just hella sad about it. But it's just, all right, say goodbye to your baby. It's terrible, dude. So Buddy going through this realization through because his motivations were like about fame at first, and about just being a superhero and recognition. But then as we get into the story, it dives deeper into these kinds of issues, and his motivations kind of switches to the balance of life and not abusing animals.
Definitely. It's interesting because I don't know if you knew this, but I think Morrison said that Animal Man was originally supposed to be a four-issue miniseries. DC
Yeah.
Comics gave it to them, and they were like, just write four issues. And obviously, it catapulted into, I don't know how many issues the run is, maybe 30, 40. But thinking about those first four issues and where it started, kind of just as this moment for Morrison to make a comic book and say, this is like what the status quo is. Like, there's a lot of horrible things happening in the industry that promotes this brutal treatment of animals that we need to pay more attention to. If like Animal Man was four issues and it was just the first four issues and it ended right there, that in itself would have been a super potent and powerful comic, and I think that's so cool that like Morrison was able to like capture so much meaning and advocacy in then just a four-issue arc.
For sure. Yeah, I actually just learned that today. It was supposed to be four issues. Thank God they let him continue because what were his plans? How did I guess he made this plan for his ending afterwards, which is crazy. You would think that's something you start from the very beginning with the idea of ending that way. So I wonder what made him do such an iconic ending, such a different, unique, weird ending.
I don't know if I'm getting too far ahead of myself, but I think like Coyote Gospel specifically, that's issue 5. So that's the issue that Morrison picked up after his initial 4 issues, and I think reading Coyote Gospel makes it abundantly clear on a reread and thinking about it with a lot of foresight. Is like I think once Morrison wrote Coyote Gospel, they knew where they wanted to take Animal Man. Because if you think about it, the issues of Coyote Gospel in itself is kind of representative of what Animal Man's going through. It's this coyote that exists for amusement, goes through so much pain, is being chased down by this antagonist. Ultimately, the coyote meets its maker and is murdered for the sake of our entertainment. Right?
Love the juxtaposition with him and what Buddy's going through. And it totally makes sense. After his four-issue arc, he's brought on to continue the series, and the first issue he does after that gives you a hint towards where it's going because that's the first fourth wall break. It's almost past a fourth wall break. It's not like breaking the fourth wall. It's just like shattering it down and sharing the house with whoever had the wall on the other side. And you don't get that yet. It just seems really weird when you see the coyote's finally dead, but you see this paintbrush drawing the blood, like a total first person's perspective of the artist, and you're like, why? What the hell is that? So it was really confusing, and it was so funny because when I was reading it at first, you and I had connected on text, and you're like, have you read the Coyote issue yet? And I was like, oh yeah, but I didn't think anything of it. So I went back and reread it, and like I really thought deeper into why the hell this paintbrush was doing that, but I still couldn't put anything together. I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, it's a Coyote issue. It's different. It's weird. But then once you get to the ending, you know where that's going. So it was kind of like, yeah, when he picked it up, his next issue. That's what I was talking about before. It's something that you would build to with your first issue. So he had this crazy idea in mind. And Grant Morrison was relatively new for comics when he wrote Animal Man, from what I understand.
Yeah, I don't think they wrote anything else that was like of note. Doom Patrol came during the middle of their run, and I think that's the only other big run they had going on at that time. But yeah, I think it was like Animal Man might have been the first mainstream DC comic they wrote.
So if you think about it, that is a really bold thing to do. Like the way he ended that is a really bold thing to do if you're a relatively new writer for a franchise or a writer at all,
I'm
comics writer.
sure it really helped with the fact that it was a character called Animal Man. You know, like if you think about it, that's probably not a character that a lot of people are going to pull issues of just based
Right.
off the concept
Right.
and the look of the character and who this person is. It's like no one knows who Animal Man is. Like, why should I read a comic called Animal Man? But then you look at the cover and it's like an artist painting the cover looking at you, and you're like, well, what's going on? Maybe I'll check this out. And I think that's kind of why Morrison might have done things in a way they did where each issue is so like esoteric and confusing and forces you to reread it, because if you think about it from the reader's perspective of pulling a single issue at the time, if you pick that up in the shop, you have no clue what it's about. It'll probably like blow your mind no matter what issue you're reading, because it's doing things that I don't think a lot of comics would have been doing during that time.
100%. It's like I don't think. Yeah, you're right. Animal Man probably wasn't selling a lot of copies. In a way, Grant Morrison like like he brought the popularity to Animal Man. In a lot of ways, Animal Man brought the popularity to Grant Morrison. If this was his first big comic run, so they kind of picked each other up in a way, which is really cool. I just find it crazy how bold of a storytelling style, or what he was trying to do here. That's so bold, but DC was probably open to letting him do some weird shit on a character that's not Batman or Superman, that's not selling huge copies. Something like that might have absolutely would not have worked with a big name character. People would have been like, hell no. If you start doing that with Batman and Superman, it fits so perfectly with Animal Man.
Yeah, imagine how mad people would be if Batman suddenly became a vegan and it's like I'm not gonna fight Catwoman anymore because that's animal abuse, or I don't know.
Right. But and the idea that he's not in control of his own destiny. Like we were totally willing to accept that Animal Man was just a pawn, or just a pawn for the writer. Like they were the gods of the writers in this story. The way that it all panned out, people would not be okay with that if it was Superman or Batman. Like, are you kidding me? Like, his decisions are what creates the story, not some writers, not some god. Like, I don't think it would have worked
No, that makes a
unless it
lot
was
of
some
sense.
some B-side character.
For real.
All right, a really cool concept they get into, and they remember the Hawkman, or the Hawk people. They had a little crossover there. I love what he says about fractal geometry because it's something that I've totally always thought of in my life. The quote says, "Perhaps you're familiar with the concept of fractal geometry. It occurred to me that life itself could be regarded as having a fractal shape, and in an interesting notion, he says." A fractal shape is one which reveals more detail, more information. Upon closer examination, it can be magnified indefinitely and still reveal new complexities, but while looking the same. Like the patterns of life are the same no matter what perspective you're looking at, no matter what scale. So, like, I always thought of like atoms to cells, look a lot like solar systems. If you look at them through a magnifying lens or a telescope, there is a very similar pattern to the stars and our own cells. Neurons looking like galaxies, even our veins and arteries to our organs look just like rivers to lakes on the planet. It's crazy. It's like a mirror image. Cancer cells invading body parts, overpopulated cities, like trashing the place, poisoning the place. There's like these patterns in life that exist on the microscopic scale all the way up to a galactic scale. And this doesn't really play into the story a lot, but I was really happy to see them just talking about that because it's such an interesting concept and I think there's something more to that that could help us understand ourselves and our place and our consciousness.
No, that's a really interesting concept. I never thought about how kind of the micro and the macro mirrors itself. The more you zoom out and the more you zoom in, you always think about images of, have you seen those TikToks of people putting dirty things under a microscope and you see all the little bacteria running around? And it does kind of remind me of that kind of like fractal quote because, like you said, it does a lot of it just looks like, a bug swimming in a river. It doesn't look that bizarre. It looks very reminiscent of something I could see with my real eyes, and I never really put two and two together, but that's a really cool observation.
All right. I don't even remember any significance with the Hawk people, but they did a few cool little cameos. Even Superman was in this,
Oh
and
yeah.
I found it funny that he almost like brushed Buddy to the side. Like his help wasn't even necessary. Like he couldn't do anything to help because he was so, I don't want to say worthless, but Superman was like, "No, dude, I got this. Just take a seat. Stick to the side," which is almost like a commentary on his place as a character to the audience at that time. Why would he go help Superman? He's not that strong. He's not that important. So again, Grant Morrison coming in with a deeper level of commentary.
For sure. I think speaking of importance, there's that. I think it's issue 7, right, where there's a villain, and the whole story is that this villain touches a meteor, and he gets the power of death, and so anything he like interact, like I think touches dies, right, and it's so funny but it's also so sad because it's this supervillain that's going through this, like the whole issue is about a supervillain going through a midlife crisis and or basically a life crisis and realizing that like this is my life. I just killed things by touching them. Let me go out with a bang. And the final shot of the issue is him jumping, and it's this like crazy beautiful white splash page and just hitting the ground, and it's just such a sad whimper. And it's so funny that like just this random issue of Animal Man is this nobody villain just having a complete breakdown because his entire power set is useless and he's left with no other alternative than to kill himself. And it's like I don't like you how do you make that work in a comic? Make it funny, make it morbid, but also make it really thought provoking. And Morrison does that. That issue for some reason had me laughing but also feeling a little, bittersweet. I
Uh,
can't really explain it.
yeah, uneasy. It's Morrison, dude. He does things like Zurinar. He does the craziest shit and somehow makes it so cool.
Yeah.
I will say that this like amped up my as a fan of Morrison, which I was kind of in the middle. He had some good stuff, had some whatever stuff, but this really made me appreciate his stuff. So I'm probably ready to go read All Star Superman now. I still haven't read that, and with it's such high praised by especially you when we talked about it in the comic talk. I still haven't read it. But to be honest, dude, it's the Frank Quietly art that part of it. Part of that puts me off. I can't stand Frank Quietly's art. They look like balloon animals. Their faces look puffy. They look soft and round, and it bugs me. Even in Grant Morrison's new X Men, it just bugs me.
That's fair. I think Frank Quietly's faces are not for everybody, but if you take a moment to like appreciate what Frank Quietly can do outside of faces, like specifically how they frame action, like with paneling and with 3D movement, I think that like Quietly definitely deserves praise because like as an artist who draws like action set pieces and dynamic movements, it's so cool, dude. Especially in I don't know if it's All Star Superman, but there's a comic book I can't remember. But like, oh, We Three. It's also Morrison. It's a comic book about like a bunch of animals that get tested on, and like become like basically weapons for the government, and they try to escape. Very reminiscent of Guardians of the Galaxy in that regard, but. It's written by Morrison. Art is by Frank Quietly. Because it follows animals, there's no puffy faces, and what like look at the paneling and tell me like the action and the way Frank Quietly does art in that comic isn't like some of the coolest examples of technique you've seen. Because if you read that comic and just realize like there's no faces, just animals, and you're still a hater, I I think I don't know. I don't think you can do it.
You're right. It's just the faces and kind of the bodies, but he does the action well. I will give him that. And all the background and scenery he does just fine too. And All Star Superman, but All Star Superman is not that action packed from what I hear, right?
There's a decent amount of action, but yeah, I think it focuses more on like the morality and humanity of Superman more so than like crazy set pieces every other page.
Right. To be honest, those crazy set pieces kind of started to give me a headache. Like, I'm really starting to appreciate more of the story in comics and less of the action. It's just the action has to be done right, but it's hard to believe when people are sitting there having a conversation while they're fighting. So, comics like The Death of Superman, when they finally get into the action, there's almost zero dialogue, and then that's almost more powerful in a way. But you can't have 50% of the comic without dialogue and just action. So I think a lot of those set like we just Jose Zane and I did the JLA Avengers crossover, and we reviewed that. Dude, and like those action set pieces, it's just the art was beautiful, but it gave me a headache like reading while interpreting the action. It's just it could be too much. You gotta do the action right.
No, I definitely agree. I'm reading Final Crisis right now. Um, Man, I'm kind of confused, but also I'm just like, dude, I just don't want to see another random superhero. Like, it looks beautiful, I get it, but like, explosion, bunch of bodies punching each other. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care.
Yeah,
Like, that's why I think Animal Man specifically is so potent because there really isn't a lot of action in this book if you think about it. Like, how many fights are there, really?
true. But when they do it, it's like tactical action where whatever's happening, it like makes sense for that fight instead of just a bunch of punches and kicks and blasts where it's just like, what am I really looking at here? I like action when it makes sense. The Punisher actually has a lot of a good action where whatever violence is taking place, it makes sense. It's easy to interpret. It's not just wild violence, which is has been giving me headaches lately.
Definitely. No, I get that. I wanted to talk about something in Animal Man, if that's okay. I don't know if I think it's issue 13, which is about apartheid. This came out in 1989, so it's actually 3 years before apartheid officially ended, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Because like I know the United States at that point in time had like a hardline stance against apartheid and was like, we stand against apartheid. We're gonna put sanctions on South Africa. But it's really funny because like today you get so many people that are like keep politics out of comic books. I don't want to hear about comic books being political. And then you look at this comic book and it's like the most political comic I think I've ever read because it's like a superhero basically going against an apartheid state and saying like you need to stop this. And there's a quote in there too that was really powerful. It was today's politics is tomorrow's mythology. And I think that's such an interesting line because a lot of times we look at political actions as like a political thing, but we don't really view them as like moments of the past, if that makes sense. And I think that's why so many people are uncomfortable now with politics and art because we look at them as like what's going on right now. But when the moment passes and you look back at a piece of media, when you look back at a political statement in media, you're not looking at it as this inherently political statement, right? You're looking at it as a piece of the past and you're understanding it in the broader cultural vignette of like society. And it's not as like it's not propaganda, it's not forced down your throat. It's just a reflection of the status quo. And I really really love that issue. It's just cuz it like has the balls to take a stance. That must have been a crazy thing for Morrison to do. And that quote especially, I was like, damn, that's so real, you know?
For sure. Well, and you nailed it. If it's not getting shoved down your throat, dude, art has always been a reflection of politics, and it's like reflecting on. It's all art has always reflected on people's opinions on life itself. I appreciate politics in comic books. You know, it's as long as it's not forced down your throat. As especially as long as it's not just extreme left or extreme right, because I hate the divide. I hate that there is a left and a right. It seems like a obvious divide and conquer strategy to keep us fighting while they kind of just write their own rules to keep us as freaking sheep. And I hate it. Like, in a way, it's, I guess, very left leaning if you look at environmentalist, right? But I would consider myself, if I had to choose, more right winged, but I'm also totally supportive of the environment and animal rights. And it's just like, why do I have to pick a side if I believe some stuff on this side and some stuff on this side? And why do people get so angry if you take a stance on the side that you don't claim and you start fighting each other? Like, that's going to help anything. With if half of America is fighting each other, we're not going to get anywhere ever. It seems so obvious. So it pisses me off. But I appreciate politics bleeding into comics. It makes it interesting. It makes it like I have a reason to read this. You know, it's a reflection of the real life in a lot of ways. So as long as it's not shoved down your throat, I don't know why you'd complain about it. Art has always been that way. All forms of
Facts.
art.
No, that's nothing but the truth there.
Yeah. All right, let's get into another display of his use of powers here. So when Vixen and Buddy are captured, this is when Buddy uses the power of bacteria to multiply. And I thought that was so sick. He uses a damn worm. Because, like, on the surface, you're like, all right, he's going to be a gorilla, have strength. He's going to be a cheetah and be fast. But he's getting deep into the whole animal kingdom, down to the level of bacteria to multiply. But this brings up a gripe where it's like, okay, if he's ever in trouble in any situation in a fight, we're probably never going to see him multiply like bacteria again. But we're probably in the future going to see him fight some people, and those people are going to beat him up. Where it's like, okay, well, now that you've established that you've had this power to multiply your damn self, I would expect to see that all the time because that seems pretty damn useful.
Yeah. No, that was a really that was such a I feel like that was a moment where Morrison definitely boxed themselves into a corner where they're like, I need a way for Buddy to get out of this, and they're like, what do I do? What do I do? Bacteria, that's everywhere, right? Um, but no, I definitely see that. Like, okay, now if he has the ability to do this, why isn't he doing it all the time? And I think they kind of got out of that loophole because, like, if I remember correctly, after that issue, it kind of gets super crazy in the book, and so we don't really have to worry about Animal Man demonstrating his powers to beat big bad foes. The rest of the story is this kind of really
Right.
nutty weird journey where Animal Man is trying to find the person that killed his family, and you know how that goes. But
Right.
definitely would have been a problem if he had any more big encounters and he didn't do that.
Well, it's a lot like the Flash, something that always bugs me. And I love the Flash so much, and I love the character, Wally and Barry. All the Flashes are solid, but it really pisses me off when anybody punches him. I'm like, what do you mean? We have established how fast you are. How did someone punch you? You know, no one should ever hurt you. No one should ever stop you. There should be absolutely nothing. You have to have a genius writer to make me believe that this villain has the upper hand on you. You know, he has part of your family in this state. He's going to blow up a bomb over on the other side of the world. Like, you have to do some really special stuff. But Flash comics are coming out every month where people are punching him, kicking him, shooting him. And like, how? That doesn't make sense. We know how fast he is. He should never get hurt.
I don't.
You
Do you
know?
know if the Flash's powers work where he just moves really fast, or like is everything really slow for him? So if like there's a punch coming at him, does he just see it in slow motion if he's like at all times, you know, or does he have to be like vibrating or whatever? I don't know if that makes sense.
That's a great point. He has to access it. So I guess because it wouldn't make sense if he was always moving at that speed because every single day for him would feel like a million hours, you know, going through work, eating breakfast, showering. So maybe that's a great way to explain it. He has to tap into it. So, but still, if I have fought someone in the past, I kind of know they're going to punch me like, a second or two before because you see it load up, you see their fist. You would think that he would just be able to avoid every attack unless it's coming from behind. He doesn't notice it. A stealth, dude. He needs like a super ninja as a primary villain. Something super stealthy, sneaks up. I don't know. They need to get better at writing specifically the Flash villains.
Yeah,
Although I like Mirror Master, and perfect segue, we see Mirror Master a lot into this.
we do. Yeah.
Um, doesn't he try to kill Buddy's family at one point?
I think so. I think he's like part. He traps Buddy in like a mirror dimension, right? At one point, and then I think he tries to kill his family, if I'm correct.
Yeah, he was
Or
hired.
yeah, I think he fails though, and then
Right.
Buddy ends up stopping him. Honestly, I can't recall much of that issue off the top of my head.
Yeah. I just Mirror Master's pretty special. I really actually do like those powers. They're very weird. Something that Morrison could work well with. There was a shot in this where he was walking away from someone, and that someone turns to shoot him, and it just shoots glass, and everything breaks. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it was the issue after that as well, where I don't know if you remember this, but his daughter's in the backyard, and she's talking to somebody, and it's like a mysterious, shadowy figure, and then she comes like running inside, and she's like, I saw you, Dad." I remember the first time I read that comic, that moment, I'm like, "What is going on?" Rereading the comic, that moment specifically is one of the coolest moments to experience again because it's that moment where it's like you reread the book and you understand that this is like a payoff that doesn't even make sense until you've reread the book. This is a thread Morrison's planted long before you even thought about it. That doesn't pay off until like 20 issues later because it's like Buddy Baker coming back in time to see his family and trapped in this time loop, and it's so crazy.
So crazy. Like at this point, we've seen the shadow figure, right? Like
I think
kind
I
of.
think it was that. I might be wrong. I think it was that issue or like the issue right after that where the shadow figure pops up.
Yeah, I was just trying to remember how early on that happened because I sure as hell didn't think that was Buddy.
Oh yeah, me neither when I first
You
read
know?
it. It's such a random moment too because when you read it, it happened so long ago that you don't even think about it by the end of the book. Like it's totally out of your brain. And then when it happens again, you're like, "Oh my God, that's nuts. What? They've been planning this for how many issues?" Right? Cuz
Yeah,
it must have been like 15, 20 issues prior.
for sure. That's why I compare it to Interstellar because the person that was knocking the. You've seen Interstellar, right?
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites. I love Interstellar, but I mean, you would never guess that Matthew McConaughey's character was the one pushing down the books in the beginning of the movie.
Mhm.
So that's why I compare the ending to Interstellar because it was Buddy all along, and this is the time traveling thing he does, trying to get back to his family eventually. But let's rewind. The second big, like, weird fourth wall shattering moment was when these aliens have Buddy and Vixen, and we've been dealing with this monkey god, Jubai, a lot. But at some point, the aliens just wipe him out of existence, and the panels show his drawing, and each consecutive panel shows less detail and less detail. Then all of a sudden, you got the lines where our writers use to keep everything symmetrical. And the alien says, "Yeah, we're just taking this dude out because he was just a side character and he's not important. So we're just
Yeah.
wiping him out." Which is different from what we see at the end that Grant Morrison is kind of the god of this comic, but in this the aliens are kind of the gods. So they can't be the writers and Grant Morrison's the right. Like that's obviously how he's writing them to write. That just becomes another confusing layer a little bit because the aliens shouldn't have that power. I understood it as the writers are the ones that have all the power, but these are actually characters in the story, and it's just so confusing. There's just layers to this Morrison thing. And what did you think of the aliens writing out Jubai?
Yeah, so I don't know if you picked up on this as well. I might be wrong, but I believe whenever the aliens do talk about Animal Man, they kind of refer to him in this like as like a post-crisis individual, right? And so the aliens themselves are often referencing Crisis on Infinite Earths because Crisis on Infinite Earths was a very big moment in DC continuity that kind of like reset DC Comics timeline and was basically the reason Animal Man got rebooted in the first place. It's because it allowed authors to bring back these old characters and kind of have a fresh start. So these aliens are like, okay, we invented this guy. He got his powers from an alien spaceship. But then after the crisis, he got his powers in a slightly different way. And I think that was Morrison's kind of first attempt at trying to like communicate to the reader that like, okay, these aliens, they know what you know. They know something bigger is going on because like how else are the aliens going to know about continuity? How else are the aliens going to know that hypothetically Animal Man has two different origins, his pre-crisis origin and then this post-crisis origin that's established in Grant Morrison's Animal Man. I know this sounds really really confusing. I don't know if you're picking up what I'm putting down,
Yeah,
but I
love it.
think the way I interpret it is that the aliens are kind of just a means for Grant Morrison to get more meta and more trippy. But at the end of the day, I think the aliens are still controlled by Grant Morrison. I think
Of
it's
course.
established that like Grant Morrison is the god of the universe, and the aliens are just kind of a veil to slowly unravel and give us this feeling of unease that maybe everything is not what it seems.
For sure. Love it. That's why we love you on this show. That's some insight. That's some intelligence. Good shit. Yeah, I love it about this though. It's like Morrison, people complain about the confusing stuff, and I do get it, but this is the confusing stuff that I love. It's so fascinating.
There's definitely a lot of, and I think this comic too would be kind of confusing to like a younger person that might not know anything about comics. I think especially if you like pick this up and people are like, read this, you gotta read it. There's definitely gonna be moments where like it does reference other DC stories and it does even at the end of the book they pull these weird random characters like kind of like the Superman ripoff and the Green Lantern ripoff and all of these Justice League imposters that actually were real life DC superheroes that existed before Crisis on Infinite Earths. These are like all examples of characters that existed in DC continuity prior to DC resetting their continuity. And within doing that, I think Morrison is also just trying to say like comics are bull, right? Like everything's bullshit. It's all continuity. It's all this mumbo jumbo that authors write to like make you excited. And then the second it becomes boring, we throw them away. We throw them away. We forget about these characters and they become nothing, right? And I think it's so funny now thinking about the comic through that lens, thinking about the aliens and specifically how they hype up Crisis on Infinite Earths to be this big. They say they don't refer to it as Crisis on Infinite Earths. They just call it the
The
Crisis.
crisis.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they're like, the crisis is the reason for this. The crisis is the reason for this. And I think that's the thing about this comic that might have aged the worst is that like if you don't know about the Crisis on Infinite Earths, I'm assuming most people did that were reading this comic. It might be a little like what? Like what are they talking about? Like I'm 16, I don't know what Crisis on Infinite Earths is. I'm not reading some Marv Wolfman book from 40 years ago.
For sure. It was interesting. I like that I knew the crisis thing because it just gave us a timeline. I love it in comics when I know when the hell shit's taking place. It gives it all kind of a cohesiveness.
For sure.
All right, and then the next concept let's get into is Buddy's talking about how the real supervillains of this world, they don't want to rule the world, they already do. Something I have always said when people are talking about, I don't know, fighting the system or finding like who's corrupting America. I'm like, dude, this is already in place. It's been in place for decades. But he's talking about how it's the businessmen in suits, multinational, big corporations, and like it's something I totally believe. It's this system feels like it's just meant to raise all of us from childhood, thinking we're supposed to sit in our desk, sit in our seat, and just we're supposed to be sheep, barely make it by, feed the system, allow the people at the top to make more money, because ultimately 90% of us are working for someone else's, we're making money for someone else. And it's like too many people worry about these conflicts that are like we are in conflict with each other. Like I was talking about the left and the right. Instead of cooperating, like we're all brothers and sisters, we should just be together. Somehow they have us all fighting, whether it's race or left and right stuff. And racism does exist. It's evil. It's terrible. It's ridiculous to look at someone and say, just because of the color of your skin, whatever, we're all just people. Like we should all just consider ourselves people. And it really bothers me that we're all fighting each other when the people at the top are just chilling, making all the money. It really pisses me off. But that seems like the status quo. Western education, it's a joke. Western medicine, a lot of it is a joke. There's a few things, some surgery, some antibiotics, some stuff that really helps, stuff that we really need. But when I go to the doctor and you tell me to take these pills, but you're never even going to mention like, hey, juice some vegetables, like find some like grass-fed beef, that stuff will help you out. Don't do sugar, don't do a bunch of processed flour. Your body's gonna fix itself. Like, why don't they ever tell us that? Because that's all true. Instead they just say, here, here's something that'll fix the symptoms. Everything like Western education, have the kids sitting in a seat for 8 hours and then come home and do more homework. Like, why was my kid at the school for 8 hours if you didn't teach him enough for those 8 hours? Why does he got to do more work when he gets home? Why can't we do other stuff, extracurriculars, socializing, activities? That's what they should be doing, not sitting down more and doing more homework. It bothers me a lot. So I was glad to see Buddy, mention that. But like with all that said, there's still opportunity, right? People could be hardworking and creative, ambitious and resourceful and grow their own business, do their own thing. It's just you have to work against the grain so hard to find a way because the system's designed to keep us as sheep. What are your thoughts on all that?
You know, there's a quote at the end of the book, and it's actually what Grant Morrison says to Animal Man. Grant Morrison says, "Why does blood and torture and anguish still excite us? We thought by making your world more violent, we would make it more realistic, more adult. God help us if that's what it means. Maybe for once we could try to be kind." And I think that's one of the last things Grant Morrison says to Animal Man before they kind of just shut off. Like they kind of just say, "Whatever, the comic's over. Animal Man, go back to your family. You're happy now." And it's a really interesting quote because I think it addresses a lot of the things you're talking about. It's like, why is there so much like pessimism? Why is there so much nihilism? Why are these systems in place the things that aim to like pacify us and make us more complacent in society? And Grant Morrison kind of addresses this, and it's like, I wanted to make your comic book more realistic and make it reflective of the real world, but in doing that, it made me depressed. Like it made me miserable realizing that like in order to make entertainment, I have to draw this harsh stark reflection of a reality where people sit down and they're pacified by society and they have no other alternative than to answer to the systems that be. And if you don't become a productive member of society, then you don't really have a lot of mobility and a lot of opportunity, and you're not seated the options to like live a happy and healthy life. And it's really interesting that like even in a comic book, Grant Morrison says, I wanted to make the world more realistic to make it more entertaining, and in doing that, like God help us if that's what it means. And it's funny, I don't really think there's like an answer to these problems, but it's funny that like even in a comic book, they're just like, fuck, why did we do that?
So what's your opinion? You think it's a good, like, you think it's cool that comics to have these violence and these revenge stories? Do you think there's a problem with that?
No, I mean entertainment's entertainment. It should be whatever it is. I think it really just depends on like the execution, right? Like
Yeah.
if it's like I don't know, Frank Miller's Batman, All-Star Batman and Robin, I
It's
don't think
ridiculous.
that's probably bad violence.
So
But if it's
stupid.
like if it's like I don't
So
know,
stupid.
Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, I think that's good violence and revenge. It just
Yeah.
depends on how you do it, how effectively you do it, how
Yeah.
the author's interpretation and execution of it plays out.
Right. Well, I think it's diving into the fantasy of some of these revenge stories can be just satisfying to read and give you a sense of satisfaction, even if it's superficial. But like I'm sitting here and I know that human trafficking exists and I want to stop it, but I don't have any power to stop it. And it disgusts me to my core. Reading a story and seeing the Punisher burn human traffickers alive is very satisfying,
Hmm.
you know. But if it gets to the point where it's just people fighting people, that can be a little useless, you know, because that I hate that we are all fighting each other. So many of us have conflicts with each other, and like we should all be getting along. We should all be strategizing against the system. We should all be collaborating and figuring out how to let's build a community. Let's all buy 100 acres and build a house and feed our kids off our own grown vegetables and maybe a pig or cow, chicken, egg, like. And then from there, we get 20 families that join this. Then we can start diving into legislation and, you know, talking to our senators and stuff once we have a little more of an establishment. But no, that's never going to happen because people do their own damn thing.
Hmm.
If you're not fighting other people, you're, I don't know, doing your own thing and not. I want to do more, but we're all powerless. It's crazy. It's crazy how little power we have. It's just satisfying in some of these stories to see some bad people get their ass kicked.
That's so true. I don't know. Life is exhausting, and I think it's designed that way. You know, life is
Yeah.
designed to be exhausting. Work is designed to be exhausting. School is designed to be exhausting. Doctor's appointments are designed to be exhausting. Grocery shopping is designed to be exhausting. They build these institutions to kind of just suck up as much energy out of you as possible. So when it finally does come time to have the passion and the heart to mobilize, we're so exhausted that we just don't have the
Yes.
ability to do that, you know? And
Right. How am I
also,
gonna
there's just
go?
like this individualistic um, mentality that's kind of just ingrained to us in Western society that it's like all about me. It's about like what best benefits me, what I should do to get ahead,
Yeah.
what I need to do. And even Animal Man addresses this, right? Like with his animal rights perspective. Like it's like you shouldn't want to eat meat because it tastes good to you. You should want to fight these systems that abuse animals because it hurts other people. But that's the problem with like Western individualism is that we're always going to prioritize the things that are most effective to us because in order to make change there needs to be concessions, right? But like when society is primed to incentivize that individualistic mindset and also make us so damn tired, it's going to be hard to do that, you know?
100%. How am I gonna build a business after an 8-hour work shift and I gotta come home? Like I'm tired, dude. I want to relax. Building a business takes a lot of energy and a lot of hours and effort. But you took up a third of my day. Another third's going to be dedicated to sleep because if I don't sleep enough, I'm not going to have enough energy to do the 8-hour work shift.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But let's get into something that should help all of society, and that's taking a big trip. Because Buddy and his homie here go and do a freaking peyote trip. And I can't say I've done that specific type of trip, but I really liked it. It was a lot of fun. You know, it's like Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Like there's a lot of psychedelic stuff going on there, concepts, but they start realizing stuff in life. Like we don't have to get into experiences, but they start realizing things in life, and it's really cool to see them go through that. I like when artists have the balls to throw that in there, and open these characters' perspectives up and really dive into deeper meanings, consciousness, whatever it is. But where does that lead them? Um, they find out a lot of stuff, but unfortunately, once they're done with their trip, they Buddy goes back and finds his damn family murdered. So,
Yeah.
first, do you have any thoughts on that trip they take and some of the realizations they come to?
Man, I'm not gonna lie. I don't have any notes about those issues. You might have to remind me about some of the topics they discussed, because what really stood out to me about that issue was just like the art was so crazy and trippy and psychedelic, and I just thought it was really pretty.
Yeah,
But I honestly can't recall much from like what they actually talked about, besides like the initial unraveling of both of them realizing that like they might just be, you know, specks on a piece of paper.
right. I don't remember the realizations they had on live, but they he does explain Buddy's powers, and he says that it comes from a morphogenetic field, and that we're all hooked up to this morphogenetic field. He said this is where your animal's power come from, is the field itself. The field is a mesh of countless smaller fields, each one a blueprint which guides the formation of atoms into molecules, molecules into cells, cells into tissues, organs, systems. He says every species is represented by its own field, by its own ideal form. It's like Plato's archetypal reality, only more subtle. And this is where the idea of totem spirits derives from. And you're connected to the essence of every creature. He says, your Buddy specifically is connected to the essence of every creature. He doesn't just have one totem like a spider or a panther or an ant, you know. What was his line in Infinity War? Oh, there's an Ant-Man now. There's already a spider and a panther, a bunch of insects. He says, you don't need to be near an animal to absorb its power, which is what he believed. The power comes from this field itself, and it's everywhere. And yeah, that's pretty much diving into his powers. I wish I had more notes on their realizations of life, but it's still a blast. Like you said, the art is beautiful. Very trippy, very Swamp Thing-esque. You still got to read Swamp Thing, dude. I'm telling you. I'm telling you.
I just haven't really enjoyed the Alan Moore that I have read.
What have you read by Alan Moore?
Killing Joke, Watchmen, and I think there's like one other like short story or something I read, but I just Alan Moore has not been hitting for me so far.
You didn't like Watchmen?
I thought it was kind of boring. I'm not gonna lie.
I agree with you. It's not even in like my top 20. I do my top shit on TikTok now. I wouldn't put it in my top 20 DC comics. It is a very slow comic. But did you get to the end of it? What did you think of the end?
I think it's cool and I think it's important and like I understand what Alan Moore was trying to do. I just feel like it's like needlessly verbose and overtly expositional, and by the time I do get to that, I mean the other problem with Watchmen is that like I've known about Watchmen for so long that I knew about the end. I knew about the
Yeah.
themes, I knew what the book was trying to communicate. So like reading the book, it wasn't really about having these realizations. It was just seeing the execution of it all. And to me, the execution, especially when you read modern comics that are just such a breeze to read and can communicate the same ideas, I would argue, much more effectively and less dull, like with, you know, way more entertainment value behind them. Watchmen, it just feels dated and irrelevant, in my opinion. But
I wouldn't call it irrelevant. I think it's super relevant, but I find it a chore to read. I think
mhm,
it is very relevant, but I think it is boring. I
yeah.
wouldn't. I tried to reread it a couple months ago, and I just stopped. I'm like, I'm not gonna put these hours into this. I know where it goes. It's great. It's like people's best comic of all time. I will say this: Swamp Thing stands above all those by far, in my opinion. It's none of the other Alan Moore books I consider some of my favorites. None of them. Swamp Thing has been a top three all time forever since I read it. It's very approachable. It is not boring. It is not slow. It is fascinating because if you at least liked, I guess, some of the writing or the depth that he goes to in his writing, that's put on display in Swamp Thing in a very well paced way. Uh, that's if you give Alan Moore one more shot, do Swamp Thing because I think you'll like it. I think it's so different from those other titles.
I'll probably try to read it, but I can't. I got so many other things I want to read, you know, that
Yeah,
it's so low on my list right now.
that's the struggle.
I'll read it before I die. I can promise. I can promise.
Perfect.
I mean, knock on wood. I got a lot of time, but I don't know if
Right.
I'm gonna read it anytime soon.
I actually do have some notes on some of that trippy stuff. So one cool thing he's talking about, his buddy, and dude, I forgot who his buddy was here. To be honest, he's got black hair. He's been his friend throughout, but he's actually talks about David Bohm's Implicate Order, and it made me buy the book. I bought this book, and I want to read this Implicate Order. It's the concepts we've been talking about with the fractal geometry and all that stuff, but he says this implicate order is a vast sea of potential. He says our culture has lost sight of this higher reality. So-called primitive people knew better. The Aborigines called it the dream time. The Yaqui Indians knew it. The Nagual knew it. It's primal reality, if you like. Our dreams of ideal worlds are just attempts to describe that infinite possibility. And everything in the universe is connected, you see, from atoms to galaxies. And we're all responsible. Every decision we make affects the future of the whole universe. And I love it. If you think back, if I don't know if you've ever looked into ancient cultures and how they studied the stars somehow without telescopes. They did their lucid dreaming or astral projection. There was so much spirituality in all the writings of all ancient cultures, and that's something that's completely lost to us now. It seems like that is part of the system we've been talking about to keep us as sheep, because if we could explore those kind of realities and that kind of consciousness, then we would have more power to make more change. Again, just another really cool concept they're addressing.
Hmm. It's interesting that you talk about this. Is totally unrelated to Animal Man, but like a lot of ancient societies, like ancient Egyptian society, ancient Roman society, were way more technologically advanced than we ever give them credit for. Like ancient Roman society had like doorbells and stuff, you know? Like they basically had like whistles set up so when you would open a door, it would like imitate a bird chirp and you could hear someone come in. They figured out irrigation and running
Yes,
water and sewer systems,
irrigation,
and it's like
sewage.
we don't really, I feel like today we don't really give them a lot of credit because
No,
we want to feel like our society is like the pinnacle of human
dude,
evolution, and so we kind of
that
downplay the technological progress made by older societies.
that is not our fault. We are a slave to what we are taught. The Western education system, they tell us what we think we know. I read a great book, did a report on it. It was actually my senior college thesis. I don't know what the hell you called it. It was my last essay, and it was a book on the year before Columbus. It was called 1492, and a ton of people writing these reports about what they found in the Indian culture before we came and just slaughtered everybody, took their land. But these people were not savages. They were not just at war with each other all the time. They were thriving. They were healthy. People explained bodies that were nothing but muscle. They had workshops. They had sheds full of supplies, shoes, but made out of fiber. Shoes that the English men would trade all their shit for these nice shoes because they were durable, mobile, flexible, way better than the steel and leather boots. Their boats were made out of fibers, way more maneuverable, lighter, easier. Like they had crazy irrigation. They were well fed. They were super advanced from what we're taught.
Hmm.
And we came in and wiped them out.
Yeah,
But
and then we erase, all of that technological progress, all of that innovation, claim it as our own, and kind of feed like but what we were talking about before, right? The only reason that we have like, in order for this like society to pacify us and force us to be complacent in these systems, you need to believe it is the best society, right? And so that involves the erasure of like technological progress of ancient civilizations and even not so ancient civilizations like Native Americans. I think it's an interesting conversation. I'm not a historian though, so I have no clue really how to expand on that.
500 years ago, they were thriving. It's really sad. It sucks. But it is what it is. We got to do it what we got with now. Um, but yeah, a lot of that also, the astral projection and all this, they were so spiritual and all. It's just a side of life that, I think a lot of people would benefit if they smoked a little weed, took a little mushroom, and kind of figured life out in that way, learned how to connect with other people and figure out your own spirit. Because if you gain a little spirituality, you understand the connection. Like you said, we have a very individualistic mindset. We should have a community mindset. We should be learning how to make the most productive and efficient communities we can. But we're just in boxes, we're watching Netflix. And hey, I even report on stuff I watch on Netflix, but at least that's better than just watching it mindlessly. We're trying to do a little something with it.
Yeah.
All right, so Animal Man, he's got his family murdered. Super sad. Another display of power, he uses the smelling powers of animals to deduce every detail of the murder to the point of what the murderer was wearing as his aftershave and stuff like that. It makes a great detective. It's another one of those powers that we were probably not going to see in the future. Like you said, writing themselves into a box. Like, why isn't he right next to Batman deducing crime scenes? Because that was pretty. I really liked the scene though, because he just uses his animal powers in so many different ways that aren't just strength or speed. Now he figures out crime scenes with his animal powers. And then we get some revenge stuff, right? So he goes after these people that kill his family, goes and drowns one of the people, because like I said, he deduces all this stuff. Drowns one, pulls another one into the dirt. He says, "You're in the dirt where you put my family, just you and the worms. And I'm sealing the tunnel." The next one, this dude's in an elevator, and Buddy just punches the whole elevator out of the building. So we get a little satisfying revenge stuff for this murder. What? And then we get some weird Bug Man versus Animal Man. Animal Man wipes him pretty quickly using the power of a fly. So in that way, he perceives time super fast. So time starts slowing down a lot. Dude, have you ever tried to kill a bunch of flies? Like, they are fast. You're trying to slap these flies, and like, how are you avoiding every strike I'm throwing? So that made sense. He electrocutes a dude with eel powers. Oh no, that was still the Bug Man. And then at some point we get to this ending. But we get some weird stuff in between, like Ultraman shows up and the crime syndicate. That's crazy. Psycho Pirate. But he starts time traveling. I don't remember how he uses time travel. How did he start time traveling? Do you remember?
I have no clue. Let me look it up. I got the book right here. I'm gonna pop it open real quick. I feel like there was like a villain or something that helped him tap into it.
Could have been Psycho Pirate too. I don't know much about him, but I know he's super powerful.
I think it might have been Psycho Pirate. Let's see. Doo, doo, doo.
But while you are looking at that, I will say this is when you get the reveal that it was him, this dark figure that kept showing up to his family's house. You get the reveal that that was him. Now that he's doing this time traveling stuff, trying to get his family back. Very interstellar, very dark matter. I don't know if you've read or seen the show Dark Matter.
I have not.
The show's fantastic. I've read that book years ago. It's one of my absolute favorite books. It's a show now, like as of a couple months ago. Really good show. Highly recommended.
So it's this guy in green. I think it's Psycho Pirate. I honestly totally forget this dude's name, but I guess he built like a time machine or something. Let me see if I can show you. Sorry.
You're good. We can edit out the.
This guy. Oh, I can't pick up the book with one hand. This is gonna be hard. This guy.
A Mirror Master?
I think
Oh no,
that's
the black suit guy.
no, the black suit guy's Animal Man.
Oh,
So yeah, I guess it's Mirror Master that helps him.
interesting. Well, we both don't know what the hell's going on there. He time travels. He starts
Yeah.
time traveling. But then, boom, we get to the ending. We've been talking a lot about this ending. But as Buddy's searching for his family, he finally goes and meets none other than the writer of the story, Grant Morrison. Um, just super crazy. Grant Morrison reveals, like, yeah, I've been writing your story. And Buddy's like, well, why? Why did you murder my family? And that's when you like what you were talking about. Well, that's what people like. They need that drama. They need that violence. He says, you care about animals because I wanted to use you to draw people's attention to what's happening in the world. This is Grant Morrison talking. It's a crazy fourth wall break. Like, he's talking to the writer of this story, in control of every single thing that's happened, every word he's spoken. Grant Morrison, talking to Buddy, says, in my world, in the real world, I can't do anything about the things that upset me. All I could do is join protest groups and write the comic. The trouble is, I felt I was turning the comic into kind of an animal abuse of the month soap opera. Didn't you feel that? He asks. I feel too strongly about the subject. I think I was just becoming preachy. animal. Like it's like all this is so crazy. It's such a mind-bending concept, executed very well.
I think the thing about that moment that really stood out to me was when Morrison, I think Buddy's kind of asking Morrison, like, why did you kill my family? And Morrison's like, I had a cat and I love this cat and this cat passed away and it like destroyed me, right? Like this cat meant the world to me and it died and I was depressed and I was angry and so I killed your family because I wanted you to feel that too, basically. And like just understanding like this fictional grief that Animal Man is experiencing is because of a real life thing that Morrison went through that like made them feel horrible was such a mind-bending moment to like pull my head around. And I think it low-key made me tear up a little bit too because I love my cat. I would be really sad if my cat died too. So I was like, damn, that's so crazy how like Morrison's basically just saying like you're only grieving because I'm grieving, and I think that's so just it was crazy. Like it
It's
blew my
powerful.
mind for sure.
It's just such a bizarre concept. And I'll say it again, Buddy, time traveling to find his family, comes across the writer of his own story, shattering the fourth wall. It's so insane.
What did you think about the stuff like right before that, where he's kind of walking through that weird dimension trying to find Morrison, and he stumbles across all of these characters that have been lost in continuity?
Yeah, and like older versions of himself, maybe even if I
Hmm.
remember. Again, I don't know. I was just tripping out the whole time. It was so bizarre. Um, I think I didn't appreciate it until he met Grant Morrison, until he started talking to Grant Morrison,
Hmm.
because at that point it just seemed like a really strange concept. Interesting but strange, but it brings it full circle when he meets the writer and he's talking to the writer about everything that happened in the story. I don't know. And Morrison continues on about the issues about how man is able to abuse and slaughter and experiment on animals simply because he's stronger. That they're nothing, and there's no more ground on which to justify any animal experimentation. He goes on about stuff like that, and eventually he even says it again. He says, "See what I mean about preaching too much?"
Yeah.
It's just so bizarre, man. I've never like been so affected by a comic. Some have made me cry, right? Some have made me emotional, but nothing has blown my mind like this. It was so cool, so creative. It stands out from any other comic. Um, I'll remember this forever. I'm excited to reread it again. I've only read it once, but this is a forever comic now. It's just, I understand why there's a cult following behind it. I understand why it's a classic. I understand why it's some people's favorites. It just breaks completely new ground. It's really love it.
Can I ask? So like I kind of said before, I think the moment in this book, like with the cat death and everything, and Morrison monologuing that grief was like a moment in a comic that impacted me in a way I've like never really been impacted before. And I think that was the moment that cemented this book to me as like this is probably one of the best comics I've ever read. I feel like you're probably feeling the same way, right? And so I'm curious like if there's like one specific moment or thing that happened in this book, like what would that moment be that would cement Animal Man as like the legendary comic?
Well, the ending. The
The
ending
ending.
is the ending is really what brought it full circle. But the thing is, I can't pinpoint one because along the way they addressed so many issues that I feel very deeply about. Not only just animal abuse, but the idea of these multinational corporations running our life, the idea of losing our way with our spirits and the spiritual world. All these things resonate with me so much, and there are things that I think about constantly ever since like college. So it just hit me in all these super important ways. Like those are all very important to me, and even if it was just addressed for a little bit, it was like connecting with me the whole time. And then when you bring it full circle to this ending, it just brings it full circle. Like everything made more sense. Everything, it's so complete of a narrative. It's such a beautiful ending that, yeah, it's just. I saw if I had to pick one point, it'd be the ending, but it's just like the journey and all those things that touched me so deeply along the way. Yeah, incredible.
Would you say it was worth the hype? Like, did it live up to the hype for you?
Oh yeah, definitely exceeded the hype. I did not. I expected a good comic from what you said, from what I've seen, because like, I did some top 10 DC stuff, multiple random variations, and people are like, "Where's Animal Man? What about Grant Morrison's Animal Man?" I'm like, it's got to be good. But I had no idea what I was getting myself into. It totally blew me away.
Would you throw it on the top 10 now? You gonna redo the list?
It's a top 10 all time, not just DC. Yeah, yeah. It's just these lists are a struggle. You got to redo them all the time once you read new stuff. But
For real.
it's a big time top 10 for me.
No,
Yeah.
I love it, man. It's like I was like I said, I was scared about the reread because I think when I think it's one of those books where you read it for the first time and having that moment of like realizing all of these things is what makes it so impactful. And so on the reread, it's really like, is this going to be just as impactful now that I know everything that Morrison's doing? And I think it is. I think honestly, it's more interesting on the reread because there's so many threads that they establish super early on that you can pick up on and look at them through different light, a different lens. Like rereading the Coyote Gospel, knowing how Animal Man ends, makes the Coyote Gospel feel like a entirely new story, right? Seeing the shadow figure, knowing that that's actually Buddy Baker traveling back in time is really interesting. Like understanding that this whole journey is kind of just futile, and each issue is just a vessel for Morrison to express a specific message they want to get across to the readers. Like, dang, like it makes you look at the comic in a totally different light. And I think that's why I love this book because it's like it has that impactful mic drop moment that will change the way you interact with comics forever. Like, let's be real. But rereading it, you're still gonna get so much out of it, and that's why Morrison's the goat. Like, this is proof of that.
I think that's consistent with a lot of stories. I Something like this you would appreciate more because the first time you're reading it, you're just sitting there wondering what's going to happen next. Where is this going? Now that you know where it's going, you could sit back. The second read, you're going to read through it, appreciating all these seeds they planted, appreciating how they built towards that narrative that you know where it's going. But I think this is one of those things that the reread the second time through would be the best time. Like Game of Thrones, the best time for me was the second watch. Now knowing where it went, seeing how all the seeds were planted, I enjoyed it like a lot more the second time, and I enjoyed it a lot the first time. I'm just saying the super complex stories, whether there's a crazy twist ending or not, is almost it's just a lot of the time it is better on the second time because you see how everything developed and how it got to where it was going. So yeah, I'm excited to reread it someday after a long list of things I'm supposed to read shortly here.
Yeah, no, for real. I honestly, this is a book I've been wanting to reread for so long, but I'm like, I have so much to read, and then I was like, yo, I'm definitely gonna reread it if someone else is gonna read it. Like, I want to see what that person experiences. Like that's another joy about this book is like seeing how someone kind of unpacks and deals with Animal Man.
I know. I want to recommend it to everybody, but it's a hard sell. I think it's a hard sell to get someone to pick up an Animal Man omnibus because you cannot read part of it. You have to read the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I think they do sell like two little hardcovers as well. They might even do a trade. I'm not sure.
But you can't do it because someone's going to pick up the first trade. If you convince 10 people to start this book, maybe half, maybe less will buy the second volume and finish it. A
You
lot
think
of them are
so?
going to read the first volume. I don't know. I don't know. I had the omnibus, so I had to finish it. It's just
You would have kept reading though after those first four issues.
I
You wanted to
I
keep
would
reading.
I would have for sure. Yeah, it's a hard sell as a comic and like I said, you just can't read part of it. You have to read the whole entire thing.
I
It
think
is
it's because
only
Animal Man is just such a goofy concept. Like even before I read Animal Man, I was like, why the fuck am I gonna read a comic called Animal Man? Like he could inherit other people's like other animals' powers. Like okay, like why do I want to spend my money to read this? But after like a lot of constant recommendations, I was like, fine, I'll do it. And then I was like, yo, okay, I see, I get it.
right. One of the big things for me was the New 52 Animal Man is very closely tied to the Swamp Thing story, and as a huge Swamp Thing fan, I expected Swamp Thing to at least make an appearance here. Like almost every other issue, I was like, is Swamp Thing coming next? Is Swamp Thing coming next? It never happened, and that's fine. But they introduced a lot of new lore to Animal Man after this, because Swamp Thing as the avatar of the green, that was a thing, but Animal Man was never the avatar of the red. And it might have been in the New 52 they established that. The red being
Is
like flesh, meat, living people. Like the red are like living meat, the green is vegetation, and the rot is like death and disease and stuff like
is
that.
Animal Man in Moore's Swamp Thing?
Nope, no, he's not.
I think Alan Moore doesn't like Grant Morrison, so
They
I
have a
think
feud. They totally
yeah,
had a feud.
I think that's probably a reason why there wasn't that cross pollination. I think Moore
Right.
thinks that Morrison not is like kind of stealing his own flow, like Alan Moore. I think Moore thinks that Morrison is a cheap knockoff, which is
Interesting.
I don't agree with that,
Dude,
but
that goes back to our fighting each other thing. Instead of community, you should celebrate. If he's he might not be copying you. If he's influenced by your work, you should celebrate that.
I think
That's
Moore's
beautiful.
also just a really grumpy old
He
man.
seems like a grumpy asshole. He
Yeah.
does.
I think he's the last guy you need to be preaching this to. He's like, he's gonna tell you to piss off, to be honest.
Well, like apparently he like hates the concept of superheroes, which is why he
He
wrote
hates
Watchmen.
he hates comics as a medium as well.
Right.
He's just been screwed over by the industry so much, and then he hates superheroes as a concept. But I don't think he hates superheroes because he wrote superheroes.
Right.
Like he wrote Tom Strong and Captain Britain and Swamp Thing.
The League of Gentlemen, which I haven't
Mhm.
read. I will say his hate for comics does not show in Swamp Thing. It feels like he loves comic books in Swamp Thing. In Watchmen, it's clear he hates superheroes and comic books because he's telling you that everything they're doing is worthless. Everything they're doing is part of the problem. The villain was probably the hero of that story.
Yeah.
It's like opposite of the superhero story.
I remember reading Watchmen, and there's like a person was trying to tell me to read it, and I was like, okay, I'll read it, and I'm reading it, and I'm talking to this person, and they're like, do you like it? And I'm like, not really, and they're like, well, just so you know, like, I don't. Moore is deconstructing superheroes. Like Rorschach's actually not supposed to be a good guy. You know, you're not supposed to empathize with Rorschach, and I'm like, I know that, bro. Like, I'm not stupid. Like, I'm pretty sure Rorschach says some, like, horrendous slurs and does really violent and gratuitous things. But to me, that's what the average, like, Alan Moore Watchmen fan is the person that's like, oh, do you know that Rorschach's actually a bad guy? You know? And it's like, you're not supposed to. I mean, yeah, no, it's the writing's on the wall. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out, you know?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I think if he hates superheroes and comics, I think he loves Swamp Thing because that dude clearly takes some psychedelics. And with Swamp Thing, he that is not the traditional superhero. He's not like going to fight crime. That is not his plan at all. His point is to keep the vegetation established on Earth and keep that safe. That's it. So if you mess with that, then you got to fight Swamp Thing. But he's also able to dive into these crazy concepts of consciousness and spirit. So I think if he hates comics and superheroes, he loves Swamp Thing because I see nothing but love in that story. It's awesome.
Okay, okay. I'll I will read it. I promise. I will read it.
Should I keep trying to sell it?
You know, bro. Look, half of these omnis I haven't read. You know, like I'm working on it slowly but surely. You know, I'm rereading Animal Man instead of reading stuff I haven't read. So I'm trying to catch up.
um,
Another quick thing I wanted to mention to you is that a moment in Animal Man is where Animal Man's like, "Is that the Doom Patrol?" And then Morrison's like, "Yeah, I'm writing their story right now,
yeah,
but it'll be over soon." And I'm like,
yeah,
That's so funny." I
I
that
noticed
was
that.
that was a nice little. I didn't pick that up the first time I read it, but on the reread, I was like, "Oh, that's so sick." And this book, I feel like more Doom Patrol in a lot of ways feels like a spiritual successor to Animal Man and carrying over a lot of the meta commentary, but being a lot less in your face about it. I think Doom Patrol is less about like understanding the spiritual relationship with comics and more so unpacking comic books as a medium. More kind of makes fun of the comic, or sorry, not more. Morrison makes fun of the comic book industry a lot. They do things like parody X-Men and make fun of comic book tropes and Deus Ex Machina. But the thing they do in Doom Patrol that they don't really do in Animal Man as much is like write characters who are deeply like relatable and empathetic. Animal Man is like a relatable and empathetic character, but he doesn't have that ensemble cast, so you don't really get to see him interact with people in like a fun, dynamic type of way to have that connection that you would when you read a ensemble cast of like 4 or 5 oddballs that don't fit in with the rest of society. So if you know, I'm just saying, like if you like Animal Man, you might want to check out Doom Patrol. I feel like it came off right after Animal Man. They had those creative juices flowing with the crazy stuff they were doing, you know.
Yeah, and like you were saying before, Animal Man is such a weird character, and that's what puts me off from Doom Patrol. They are weird characters.
But
The
that
only
now knowing that Animal Man was a weird
Yeah,
character.
exactly. And then he executed so well. I'm all about it. The only exposure I have to Doom Patrol is in the Titans series. You see that?
I haven't.
It's really good. Season 1 and 2, anyway, are really good. It's polarizing, but I want to go. Well, all right. First, we'll finish off Animal Man talk, but I have other questions regarding your omnibus.
Okay.
The art, just real quick. The art. What did you think of the art? Because for me, the art was great, but what I really loved was the covers. Every single issue had a cover art by Chris Bolland, Brian Bolland, and it's the same artist who did The Killing Joke. Which, if you like or hate The Killing Joke, the art was awesome. I think it's undeniable. And that same artist did every single cover for every issue, and it looked very. I want to say Ethan Van Scivery, one of my favorites. Oh no, very Gary Frank. He very Gary Frank style, right? So
You think so?
I felt like just the
Oh,
covers.
the cover art, the Brian Bolt. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, just the cover. So I was hoping he would bleed into the stories because I love that art and I love Brian Bolland. I love Gary Frank. They look very similar. What did you think of the art? And
I
also,
agree. The covers were definitely the highlight for me. I think the art is one of those things that was a little off-putting because, like, I know I kind of look like a nasty old man right now, but I'm actually young. Like young, I'm like a Gen Zer. Like I don't really like a lot of older comics because I think older comic book art just kind of feels dated. And you
thank
know,
you.
if that makes
Yep,
sense, like I'm
agreed.
not a big. This is gonna sound horrible, okay? But like I just can't get into like the Steve Ditko Spider-Man. You know, like
Yeah,
it looks great, but like it's just I look at it and I don't want to read it because it just
me
looks
too.
old. Uh,
I could relate with that so much, dude. I think
and
we're in the minority there, but
Animal Man has that feeling a little bit. Like you start reading it and it kind of does feel reminiscent of like an older time period in comic books, but I think the art picks up as Morrison gets more expressive and creative with their narrative, and luckily the narrative is so engaging from the get-go that it wasn't too distracting.
yeah, so I agree with Steve Ditko. The art didn't turn me off at all. I thought it was totally fine. It did feel a little old, but not like it's giving me a headache looking at this stuff. The cover issues are awesome. I'm so happy you said that about older comics, dude, because like have you tried some Claremont X-Men?
I can't do it. I can't do
Thank you,
it.
dude. It's I get a lot of hate on not including a bunch of Claremont stuff, and I've tried a few, and I can't freaking do it, dude. The art doesn't work out for me, but not only that, the dialogue. They're like, I'm going to use my psionic blacks to disrupt your field of navigation, and they're explaining their powers. The dialogue is so corny and I can't believe it. Like not in the way like I just can't actually grasp it. Like it doesn't. That's not how people talk. How could I read this if that's not how people talk? Um, Older Spider-Man stuff too. Like just the older stuff doesn't do it. And it's probably because you and I read comics starting at a later age.
Hmm.
So it's really hard to go back and read the older stuff. The
I mean, the
dialogue's
first
corny. The
comic book
art,
I ever read was Civil War. So like I
that's
think
good
I
art.
read that when I was like in like seventh grade. And I read it and I was like, this is really good art, super fast paced story, right? Like that dialogue is just page churning. You don't really have to think about it too much. And then, like you said, you go read Claremont's X Men, and it's just walls of words, dude. And it's he like establishes new concepts every single page, like you said. And it's just, I get why it's important. I get why it like established who the X Men need to be and like gave you the status quo of like what, like 2 decades, but it's just so boring. I feel like I'm just
Yeah.
like I don't want to read all of that hubbub.
I totally agree. I'm really happy you said that because I really felt alone there for a while with all these. The TikTok posts been blowing up, but the most negative reception I get is not including Claremont stories. And I'm like, I just don't get it. I've tried Dark Phoenix, I've tried Inferno recently, and I was excited to read Inferno. The concept sounded awesome. Sinister, Mr. Sinister was the main villain. I was excited. A couple issues in, I'm just like, dude, I can't do it. I'm done. I'm done with Claremont. I can't do it. It's too late. And maybe if I
Hmm.
was 8 years old and it was like
I feel
new
like
at the
if you were eight
time,
years old, it would have been harder to read.
that's true too. I don't know what it is, but there is a die-hard following for old Claremont X-Men,
It's
and
because
like,
those people probably just grew up reading Claremont X Men,
yeah, for sure.
you know, and
And
so
then you get
like
to, well,
it
then you get
doesn't
to
seem
Morrison.
inaccessible to, yeah, and then
You get
Morrison's
to,
so easy to
yes,
read.
it's so good, and all the, it's like, oh yeah, that's how people actually talk to each other. That's how people speak. Like not, like yeah, I don't know. Like explain, and Spider Man's guilty of that too. In those comics, those older comics, he's sitting there explaining the whole thing. Well, I'm gonna web up his arms so he can't grab his weapon. Like, no, it's not how. It's not how people talk. It's not how I can read things. So that's cool, and I'm not alone anymore. I got you, got you on my side there. That's awesome.
This is gonna get us a lot of flack if you
I
post
know.
that take.
Hey, but hey, might not post that one on TikTok, but for the comic list, I mean, for the podcast listeners, sorry, it is what it is. You want
Yeah,
opinions, don't you? Everyone can't have the same goddamn opinion. That would be boring.
that would be boring.
All right, so I want to know about your omnibus collection and what you want to read next. What's on the back burner? Like, what have you waited for? What have you had for a freaking year and never read? Like, what's going on with your reading list and omnibus collection?
Yeah, so right now I'm currently reading. I just started the Venom Omnibus by Donny Cates,
Oh,
and
nice.
I'm also reading Final Crisis, because I'm like gonna do Morrison Batman 1, Final Crisis, Morrison Batman 2, Morrison Batman 3. So those are the two books I'm reading. Funnily enough, the Morrison Batman books are like one of the first comics I ever got, and it just took me so long to read them because I was like, okay, in order to read Morrison's Batman, you have to read Final Crisis. In order to understand Final Crisis, you need to read Infinite Crisis. In order to understand Infinite Crisis, you need to read Identity Crisis. Before Identity Crisis, you need to read Crisis on Infinite Earths. It also helps to read Morrison's JLA. You also got to read Seven Soldiers, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
I got this huge backlog of just all of these books that I've been reading basically for almost 2 years to build up to the point where I can finally read Morrison's Batman. It's been a long time coming, but I'm excited.
Yeah, when I started reading, I started with all the events. I did all the major events.
They
And
suck,
then,
dude. I hate them. I have
what
not
do you
enjoyed a
mean?
single DC event.
Well, I'm going from Marvel and DC both.
Oh,
So I started with events. Civil War, Secret Invasion, Secret Wars, Infinite Crisis. I read before reading like it's like one of my first DC comics I ever read, but I liked it. I didn't love Final Crisis, but I hear you got to read it twice to really appreciate it.
mm-hmm.
I did not like Crisis on Infinite Earths because of the stuff we were talking about. It's old, it's outdated, the dialogue's terrible, in my opinion, and it was just a chore to read. So it's one of the only DC events I didn't like. But again, Final Crisis didn't love it. Here you have to read it twice. But I would read the Marvel events. I think Marvel does events better.
Marvel
I,
does have so I don't know what I'm saying. Marvel has really fun events. I love like Civil War. I think has aged kind of poorly in some departments, and I do think it has a lot of flaws, but it's just so damn entertaining, you know. Secret Wars by
yeah,
Hickman, the build up to that with like Fantastic Four and
yeah.
Ultimates and Avengers and just everything that's been going on in both universes. It's just the coolest freaking thing ever. Um, even like the smaller events they do, I feel like is super exciting. Like the Venom King in Black stuff seems so dope. I haven't
Yeah,
read it, like for the other events, but just like in the Venom story, like the King in Black stuff is so dope. I haven't read Devil's Reign, which is like the new Zdarsky event, but that sounds cool. Like I'm more inclined to read Devil's Reign than I am to check out freaking Zero Hour or Heroes in Crisis or
that's crazy. You mentioned those specific two books. I got those on my reading list too to figure out the whole Parallax Hal Jordan thing. Zero Hour, Heroes in Crisis. Um, but the build up to Secret Wars, I think, is better than Secret Wars, dude. Like the whole Avengers and New Avengers run leading up to Secret Wars is phenomenal. I like Secret Wars a lot, but the build up think was even better. Time runs out. The Namor and Black Panther feud was so sick along the lines of the incursions in the background, Doctor Doom manipulating everything. I think it's sick.
See, I have so much stuff I need to read, but in the back of my mind, I'm always just like, should I just pick up Hickman's Fantastic Four and just do it again? Because like I want to. It's just so damn good, bro. Like Hickman is the go. I think I've talked about Hickman a lot and how much I
Yeah.
love Hickman's work, but dude, that stuff it's just the coolest payoff, the coolest interconnecting threads, and like you said, especially I think the new is it Illuminati or like the new Avengers stuff with the council trying to like destroy worlds and having that whole
Yeah.
philosophical conversation is one of the coolest concepts I think I've seen
Same.
explored in Marvel Comics. Like the immense guilt they feel and how like all of these tough superheroes are like, I can do it. I could do it. It's not that big a deal. And then none of them can do it. They all get sweaty hands and it's like that's so funny. Like I like when like you kind of humiliate the characters like that because of course everyone would everyone's a gangster until shit pops off. Like no
Right.
one's got the balls to fucking destroy a universe and I love
Right.
all of these huge egos in a room just like it's so now I'm thinking about it. I'm like maybe I should reread it.
Yeah. No, I'm really enjoying because I'm going through all of it, fucking volume by volume, and we're covering it on our podcast. Um, it's so good, and it's like the ending of Watchmen. It's the utilitarianism perspective on you. You might be doing something terrible, but if it's the greater good for everybody, then you got to do it. But you got Steve Rogers over there, like, we're gonna find a different way. We're not killing a planet. That's not what we do. Well, it's like, okay, Cap, but the whole universe is gonna die if you don't. So stop being a pussy. And it's such a cool it's such a cool, yeah, balance of philosophy and doing what's right or wrong. But it's so intense. The Avengers have to kill billions of people to save their universe. Like that's deep,
Hmm.
he has some balls to write stories like that, and it's so interesting. But let me ask you this: outside of the whole Final Crisis storyline, what are some other back burner things you haven't read that have been sitting around for a while?
I have a lot of indie stuff that I've been meaning to get to. I really want to read Saga. I've had that sitting on the shelf for a very long time. I also really want to read, Johns' Green Lantern. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes, dude, one of
And
my
then
absolute favorites.
I also really want to check out Gotham Central. I did also just order Uncanny X Source, the Uncanny X Source,
Yes.
and I really want to
Also,
read that because I read Black Science by Rick Remender, which is an Image comic. That was one of the best comics I've ever read as well. Like that's in my top five for sure.
say it
Um,
again. What is it?
Black Science. It's by Rick Remender. It's an Image comic about like multiversal time travel and an egotistical scientist who wants to make the world a better place with his time machine. It kind of sounds reminiscent of Hickman's Fantastic Four when I say it out loud, but the way Remender plays around with timelines and dimensions and kind of just deconstructs his antagonist and shows the just like the gaping flaws and ego. It's crazy. I love it. And so after reading that by Rick Remender, I was like, I need to check out X Force now.
X Force is one of my. It's probably a top five. It's just the first half of it is why it's my top five. The second half, I don't love as much, but the first like what I don't know 20 issues or something. before they start going into time with Captain Britain, it ends with like the age of not age of apocalypse, but it's some kind of the dark archangel saga. That's where when that ends, the rest of it's kind of whatever. But up until that point, it's one of my favorites. Jeff Johns' Green Lanterns is one of my top three all time. Like I have a pretty established top three. So that's Swamp Thing by Alan Moore. That's Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers all the way up to Secret Wars, and that's Jeff Johns' Green Lantern, leading up to Blackest Night, starting with Green Lantern Rebirth. Those are my absolute favorite. So yeah, I'm really excited to see you or hear your thoughts on the Jeff Johns' Green Lantern and Swamp Thing when you do read it in 20, 30 years. Uh, but you've read all the Hickman Avengers and New Avenger stuff?
Yeah, I got the Omnis, and then I got the Fantastic Four as well, and so I did. That was like the first big reading order I did. I started with his Fantastic Four, and I read all of that, and then I read all of his Avengers stuff, and then I read his Ultimate stuff, and then I finally got into Secret Wars, because I wanted to like read Hoxpox, and I knew like Secret Wars was before Hoxpox, so I was like, I'll just do that, and that in itself was like, that was like one of the most satisfying things I've ever had in comic books. So I'm just like, wow, like the payoff was so good. I was like, damn, I love this. Like Doom and Secret Wars, the White Doom, the Maker, all of these different characters and these weird like kind of like battle world variants of them. It's just so badass, dude. Like Hickman, I've talked about Hickman a lot with you before, but like he's the best.
One of the absolute best. I didn't love his Ultimate Universe stuff. I'm on the Omnibus Gods side on that one. I didn't love it. I got the Omni. I read the whole thing, but I loved everything with the Maker. But he was not in it that much. I expected way more focus on the Maker.
I
So
thought the What did
didn't
you
love it.
not like about it? Can I ask?
Well, it felt too all over the place for me. It didn't feel like a direct story. Granted, the omnibus has a four-volume Hawkeye series, it has a four-volume Thor series, and then it has the Ultimate Avengers stuff. But even the Avengers stuff itself felt all over the place, not very like direct and like concise of a story. There wasn't like a main problem, a main threat, and I was expecting that to be the Maker, and I expected much more attention on the Maker. So that might have been my own fault for my own expectations. I thought it was going to be like a lot of pages of the Maker, building him up. How did he become the Maker? What is he doing that's so savage and such villain y? So yeah, it was probably my own expectations that maybe if I read it without those expectations, that's happened a lot. When I expect something, I read it and they don't get that, I'm pissed. But sometimes I reread that thing and it's not really that bad once I drop those expectations.
That's fair. I think it's like, uh, I, I think the Omnibus God also had like a very similar perspective to you on that. He was like, it just feels like nothing went on and it was too much fluff. I really like the Thor stuff. I thought this, I don't know if you've read
That was the highlight.
Millar's Ultimates, but
I
like,
didn't like it.
you didn't like Millar's Ultimates?
I didn't like it. No.
But I don't like it either, but I think it is interesting to like I think Thor was one of the most interesting things about Millar's Ultimates. Like this idea is like is he actually like insane or is he a god? You know, like I thought that was a really cool pitch, and so I think seeing Thor explored in Hickman's Ultimate omnibus was really interesting. The Ultimate Hawkeye stuff, I was like kind of hit or miss on. Like it was fun, and I really liked the Ultimate Universe stuff because I just felt like it had stakes. Like when they nuked Congress or whatever, and like half the world was destroyed, I was like, that's cool. Like I really like that they just like went balls to the wall and was like, fuck it. Like I'm just gonna destroy as much as I can. Like it felt like by the end of the comic, everything was falling apart, and it was like the end of the world basically. And I appreciate that Hickman did that. I think because of the Ultimate Universe and the nature of where it was at during that time period, he had the ability to kind of just say, "Let's wipe it all," you know.
Yeah, for sure. A last few questions there. Deceased? Have you read Deceased?
I've read the first volume and I love it.
It's really
Uh,
good.
I'm really excited though because they finally announced an omnibus for it, so I'm gonna wait. I think the omnibus comes out next year, and it's like all I think 4 or 5 volumes of Deceased. So that's definitely like high on my list.
Yeah, I get so annoyed because I got all the volumes except the War of the Undead Gods, and I was like, God, I want that omnibus, but am I going to spend $60 or just spend 15 and get the last volume? Like, damn, I would have much rather, what, I guess waited, but I'm not mad I waited. I'm glad I read the story as it goes. Yeah, Deceased is pretty solid. All right, let's wrap it up. Thanks for joining us, Yuhoo. Thanks for joining me, dude. A great pleasure. That was an awesome conversation.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, man. I'm glad that Animal Man impacted you as much as it did. You know, makes me
Oh,
feel
yeah.
confident in my. I know I've let you down with the Ultimates, but at least Animal Man delivered.
That's such a hit or miss kind of comic, I feel like. But yeah, I appreciate you bringing Animal Man into my life, changed my view on comics. It made it into probably a damn top 10 all time of Marvel DC, period. But yeah, go ahead, check us out on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, all the stuff. We have shirts available on the TikTok link. It's a copy and paste link, but we got the Why So City shirts, old logo in white, new logo in black. Buy some shirts, support the crew. We're going to do a Red Hulk Novice Nerd episode pretty soon. Get to know the Red Hulk before Captain America Brave New World. And thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Why So City as a Nerd podcast.